I want to say good morning, but I guess it's really afternoon at this point, right? So, and big applause to the Black Hat coordinators for giving us time, especially for us traveling from different parts of the world, an opportunity to get acclimated a little bit to our to the time zone and sleep in a little bit as we acclimate. But one, I just want to say this has been a phenomenal event. I hope you're all having a great time. In a Black Hat fashion, I'm not going to go deep into technology here. I'm just going to really talk more about how I see our role evolving, some of the observations that I've had over my career, and then inevitably what I've done at a company called Equinix as I'm their Chief Information Security Officer, looking after our data centers and our large interconnection fabric as well. I'm also an independent board director for a company called F5. Many may have heard of it, big networking company, but also getting into the application security space. And really the goal of my conversation here is not to sort of get deep into the weeds of technology, but really just talk about how our role continues to evolve. And I'll tell you, I love all of the discussion we're seeing here at Black Hat today as it relates to, not over the last few days, over how our roles are not just becoming strong operators if we always have been, but really how we have to think about different parts of our role around the relationships, burnout, the mental health issues, diversity, all the things that are so important to keep us moving at what I like to call an officer pace. So before I get too far ahead, does this date as it relates to the CISO function, and I'm going to try to get a little of audience participation here, does this date resonate with anyone? Anyone bold enough to just sort of throw out what this date might mean to the CISO role? Anyone out there? Man, I can't hear. Say that again. Thank you. It's super hard to see back there, but whoever said that, absolutely. This was actually the very first appointment of a Chief Information Security Officer by an organization called Citigroup. And I think it was a pivotal moment because you can go read on why they brought their CISO on. The gentleman was Steve Katz. He's done tremendous thing for our role and for developing our community overall. But the reason I think it's important to keep this into context, because if you think in terms of generations, this is really, we're just kind of starting the second generation of our role here. And a lot of us came from technical backgrounds, operational backgrounds, and I think if you look at what we've accomplished in just a very short period of time, in less than 30 years, we've built great standards, we've really made an impact in specific areas, we've changed the conversation around security, around risk in most of our organizations, and we've done tremendous and very material progress in the role. But I think as we look forward, we've got some big headwinds on what we need to think about for this next step of our journey, or I like to call this kind of second generation of what the CISO, and I'll tell you, I wish I was about 20 years younger because I would love to take part and actually continue to run a security organization for the next 20 years. I don't think I have that career life in me, but I think it's a really exciting time to be in this field and a very exciting time to continue to shape this role in a way that's going to have a major impact on organizations as well as communities. But we clearly still have some headwinds, and you've heard a lot, and you've seen a lot. I mean, the threat landscape continues just to come at us at a faster pace. Speed of attacks, the massive attackers that are coming at us, especially given the commoditization of so many of these attacks and how easy it is to actually exfiltrate a lot of these hacks. And then inevitably, data just continues to just expand around us, and AI is just going to really sort of put that on an exponential curve in terms of the amount of surface area that we have to continue to protect as leaders. So that threat landscape is going to continue to be just this big headwind for us, and this is why I think it's so important as a community we continue to be strong operators. And that's why a lot of the activity you see here with these great technology partners, as well as all of these great capture the flag and bug bounty and all these TTP tricks of the trade, we got to continue to invest in ourselves in terms of that perspective, because that's always going to be our table stakes as an organization, is that we are strong operators and we understand this space very well. But we also are starting to see a lot more of regulation, specifically around data regulation, privacy, disclosure. If you follow the United States very closely and what's happening there, SEC has just passed some regulation that I think they're already enforcing. They are already enforcing. but I think it's going to continue to evolve and create some very, I think, great dialogue for our role and our function. But I think we have to, as a community, step into this role a little bit more and providing our perspective on how SEC and these different regulators need to think about our industry and regulate us, to be quite frank. And then there's some other things, obviously, what I'll talk a little bit about in terms of opportunity around ownership of security. I still think that's a big challenge in our industry, especially when you start to talk to different CISOs. I'll go into a bit more detail on this. And then inevitably, as relates to that responsibility, really, how are you building the organization in a way that the entire organization is kind of marching towards the same page? You're getting the efficacy out of your platform that you need to from a risk perspective, and you're really making that ease of use work for a company. So these are just still some of our headwinds, but the reality is, in my observations of just talking to a number of organizations, and I've been fortunate to be in the IT field for almost 30 years myself, security most of that time. I've worked for some phenomenal places, not just Equinix, but also at Mandiant and Google. I worked over at Microsoft for most of my career. And as a result, I was able to see a lot of change in the industry, plus actually get a lot of hands-on keyboard fun in terms of actually fighting threat actors. And I'll tell you, I still to this day get less nervous when I have to put my hands on keyboard and actually do some sort of incident response versus presenting to a board of directors or presenting to a bunch of executives. So again, another thing that we just have to continue to build is our ability to influence at very senior levels, in an area that I continue to invest in myself in as well. But these are just some of the observations. Well, I'll go into a bit more details on each of these around groups or functions that I've seen have matured very quickly that are helping organizations move into this more officer and influencer role at the executive level, and then how we're doing some of this at Equinix and some of the things that I've done in the past 4 years in my tenure as the CISO at Equinix. So let me start with just, I think is unfortunately probably one of the harder ones. These are all hard, to be honest, but this is tough. And what I still find, and I know a lot of folks have different feedback on this, but the reality is I think most security officers out there are seen as being responsible for security for an organization. And a lot of times there's very little debate on that. But when you actually go under and go a few layers deeper on that, things kind of break down. And what I recognize and I observe is that suddenly it's like, well, we're not sure that you're responsible for that or accountable for this. Where does as we like to say in the United States, where does the buck stop effectively? And reality is job one, I think, for any effective security organization is you have to do a couple of things. One is you have to, define what does responsibility mean for the company, and then what is the scope of that responsibility? And this is some of the things that we've done here. And just for clarification, if this is a debate you're having in your organizations, especially as it relates to the United States and I think even parts of Europe, and we're seeing it globally, regulators have voted. So from an enforcement perspective, these regulators are coming out and saying, hey, we believe the CSO or the CISO is responsible for security, and this is where we're going to enforce regulation on this individual. So making this topic a little easier for us to have, but it's also a little bit more nerve-wracking as well. But establishing that responsibility and the scope, and for us at Equinix, we define it around the 4 scopes that you're seeing here. And for us, building that scope means that we can get clear visibility across the landscape of all of the different digital architectures, data, operations as it relates to security. We can apply governance at all levels, and that we have a strong understanding of the control efficacy or how the controls are doing to help us achieve our mission based upon each of those controls. So getting that responsibility clear, and then inevitably, any security organization that thinks you can do it all, you probably know you can't. And security is getting more democratized in terms of you need more and more people in the organization to have a greater security culture, greater security awareness, and from an accountability perspective, this is where we have transferred some of that accountability, and I think a lot of organizations are doing, responsibly transfer that accountability to different groups. So for example, what you see here on the right side of the screen, and I apologize because some of these are eye charts, but we've looked at, okay, how do we start to look at different groups? In this case, it's our development organization or our software engineering, and where do we have accountability that we can transfer into those specific groups and ensure that they are helping us achieve our outcomes of security. And we didn't look at it in terms of, hey, how are you doing specific tactics around, a specific tool or a very specific control. We looked at more outcomes of things like where can we transfer accountability so that we can get more innovation in our development organization, how we can quicken the pace of development and innovation in the organization, how we can achieve security, and then how we can balance that security for our customers as well as our shareholders. So we looked at these different accountability values based more on business outcomes that we're trying to achieve in the business. This is a hard step, but it is so important to make sure that we've established that responsibility and understand where we've transferred that accountability, knowing that you still can't transfer responsibility from a CISO organization, especially if you have regulators coming and asking you questions or doing any enforcement. The second piece is around enterprise governance. And this is, again, another really hard thing to tackle for me personally. And really setting up a function, and what we've done at Equinix and what I've seen very effective organizations do, is really set the tone using governance structures to do that. And again, security is going to become even more democratized in terms of how organizations look at security. And this is the way in which you really help drive everyone on the same page, how you help prioritize security across an organization, is by setting up these governance structures, obviously in a way that's going to fit your organization. At Equinix, we looked at it, we wanted to set the tone of the culture, so we brought in our security, our most executive leadership into this committee, our CEO, our C-suite. We actually have included our board and our very top level of our executive sponsors, really to help us set the tone that this is a corporate, very executive level driven initiative across the company. And then as we start to set the tone at the different functions that help us achieve our goals, whether it be IT or our product organizations, risk or legal, these are now a group that we bring together to help us manage and prioritize and really extend, we almost call these cyber champions, extend the awareness of security across all the different functions in the organization. And these are voting members that have an opportunity to help us review our risk registers, help us establish prioritization of where we're going to put our money, where we need to invest faster, maybe where we need to invest because we're not getting the results that we'd hoped for. But inevitably, having this structure in place has helped us to really sort of bring others involved and set that tone of inclusion across the organization. And then inevitably, set the tone of accountability by ensuring that these subcommittees that we've set up are the folks that are actually going and helping us achieve these different control outcomes. So for us, we look at very much around our product, which is our customer, our corporate security and corporate safety. I won't go into each of these, but you can see we've got managed committees that meet more on an almost day-to-day basis on how they run their different investments and how it links back up to our overall strategy across the company. We've done some other things around automation that if we get time, I would explain more to you in terms of how we automate a lot of our GRC capabilities to automate how we're looking at risk, how we actually bring risk into the system, how we categorize that risk so that we can ensure that we are actually what we like to call creating more transparency around each of those policies or control statements that we set out. And happy to talk more on that as folks wish. But reality is, again, another hard step, but something that I think is incredibly important to set up well and invest the time to actually build and set the tone of the culture across the company. This piece, and again, a little bit of an eye chart, I apologize, but this is one of the areas when you come back to one of our headwinds around how do you build more efficacy in the security controls. And you can see a lot of great providers out here and partners that we have in security. You can look at any architectural map of a security organization, and there's a lot of tools out there. We are managing a lot. And the users that we support as a company, as any organization, they fill a lot of our tools as well. We put more agents on their devices. We get in line with not blocking, but we get more in line with inspecting things in terms of ensuring that they have a device that we can trust, a session that we can trust, an identity that we can trust. Inevitably, we have a lot of different tools that sometimes aren't as connected as they need to be. So one of the things that I've seen are really effective organizations, and we've tried to model at Equinix, is how do we build security more as a platform? A connected platform, a platform that's also extensible, ideally through APIs, but it's very user-centric, and we take almost what we like to call a product operating model, but basically product-led growth in terms of how we measure success on our platform, how we ensure it's connected, how we're ensuring we're getting the adoption as well as the user experience that we expect. But most importantly, this platform and that connection is instrumented all by data. And so we put a lot of investment at the core of this to make sure it's connected to all of that GRC automation that I showed in the previous slide. But more importantly, we have a security data lake that is allowing us to actually start to model potential threats, identify specific areas that we need to do something about, whether it be in a bit more protective mode like block something, or in a response mode like some sort of SOAR automation. But the whole goal is you have to build an organizations that think about security as a platform, and then how do you make that platform easily connect into different business processes. Example would be software engineers versus, we think about our software engineering, we build all of our code into Terraforms and in different ways so a software engineer can actually access this platform in a way that's very frictionless, and we can put the policy into those APIs and make it a lot easier for a developer to do their job and continue to innovate at a very fast pace. But getting this mentality of a product operating mindset and building the basis code has been something that I feel great organizations continue to do, and we're putting a lot of work in that. This is to me, this is a really hard piece, and this is, I think, probably one of the areas that is going to demand more of our time as an organization, as a function, as CISOs, as security officers, to put some focus on. And if I put my board hat on from F5 now, I always get so kind of envious of my CFO peer. And they got all of these great sort of income statements, cash flow statements, balance sheets, all of this great, very codified, very well understood data points that sets the tone very quickly in terms of how healthy the balance sheet is for a company, where the risks are in the balance sheet, inevitably where investments need to come or go away from, those types of things. And of course, they've had a lot of generations to develop their discipline. But then we get to security, and we're a little bit over the board, right? So you've got different control frameworks. We have different ways of actually building key risk indicators. And this is a really tough space. And I think this is an area, as a security function, we need to invest more time. And I'm personally doing something around building what I call this balance sheet for security. Happy to get as many people as involved in this, because I think it's got to be a very collective effort across the community. But no matter what you do here, what's incredibly important by effective organizations is that you pick a framework in which you want to baseline your maturity and identify what those key risk indicators are. Make sure your executive and your boards are absolutely on the same page of what does this mean in terms of our focus, in terms of how we prioritize, how we invest, and how we trace our security programs. And again, this is becoming more and more important as regulators are starting to ask boards of directors, ask CEOs and other executives in the C-suite that they sign off on a lot of these security programs as part of a regulatory framework. So pick a framework. We chose NIST, and we've modified some of the NIST. I was listening on some of the other speakers over the last couple of days. I saw NIST seems to continue to be a very popular approach. It's a great framework. It's got a lot of different components of it. And we look at, there's about 900 controls across the NIST family that we look at in measuring our maturity and looking at different areas of how we report up to our board of directors and to our executive community. Second piece is report regularly. So the consistency to the board is absolutely imperative once they really understand how you're measuring and baselining the programs, and then try to get that audited and unaudited view, just like a gap principle would be. And these are just an area that I would just, again, say that this is an area where we as a community need to put a lot of focus on. I'm being very mindful of the time, so I'm sorry if I'm moving a little faster than I want. But the reason I put the GAP rules up here, and GAP is basically the general accepted accounting principles, which is the way a lot of financial auditors look at, and financial organizations look at their different financial metrics, whether it be audited or unaudited in terms of the GAP rules. And these are the kind of rules that I think we need to introduce as a community as we think about 2.0 that are going to really help us validate and justify the investments we're making in security, as well as the outcomes we're getting on security. And with less than 30 seconds left, and you've heard a lot of things about culture, about burnout, about diversity, all incredibly important topics that we don't spend enough time as a community discussing, and I'd love to see more dialogue on this. But nevertheless, whatever your framework of leadership is, successful organizations that I've seen that are making this transition have a very strong very strong vision of what the leadership of the organization needs to look like. At Equinix, we set these 5 pillars. We have very specific measurables on how we do things around recruiting people who can help us set direction, building and nurturing alliances. You hear a lot about relationships and how we have to use relationships to build our programs. The managed self-effectiveness is very much for us about managing that burnout, ensuring that you're maintaining your mental health and finding those boundaries to really pivot in a function that is incredibly difficult for us to manage because it's got a lot of changes, a lot of demands in our business, and there's a lot of burnout as you've seen a lot of things. I won't get into the others because these are the areas I think we do really well. We operate really well as leaders, but nevertheless, have a leadership framework, stick to it, and drive that culture in your organization. With that, I've definitely gone over time, and I apologize, but if you have any questions, I'm around. If you want to get involved in anything that we're thinking about in terms of a balance sheet or any other areas, would love to get your feedback and see how you can help. But thank you very much, and have a great conference.